Following the critical and commercial success of his art form-defining 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick, the most legendary expat American filmmaker of the 20th century, set his famously concentrated sights on one of the most imposing biographical subjects in modern Western civilization: fallen Emperor Napoleon I. Born Napoleon Bonaparte on the island of Corsica off the western coast of Italy, he would in time become an artillery officer who seized control of France and conquered most of Europe following the very bloody aftermath of the French Revolution, a time now known as the Reign of Terror. Napoleon's consolidation of power ended that tumultuous period, but began a whole new era of Europe-wide bloodshed known as the Napoleonic Wars, which lasted for 12 years and left 6 million people dead or missing, upended the lives of countless others, and changed the course of European history. Hello everyone, I'm your Screen Jockey Justin Neal. Today I'm going to talk about a movie designed to capture every aspect of this colossal figure, including student, soldier, officer, statesman, emperor, and twice dethroned enlightened despot. The uniqueness of Napoleon's life offered Kubrick a chance to make a grand, majestic film based on a sweeping historical subject. A tale of glamour, revolution, maximum erotica, envy, greed, intrigue, betrayal, battles on land and sea, and above all, power. An undeniably charismatic leader who brought about his own downfall by a combination of hubris and folly, Napoleon was an ideal subject to allow someone with the temperament of Stanley Kubrick to flex his skill set on an epic scale. Such a tale would show large swaths of Europe and North Africa, from Lisbon to Cairo to Moscow, with huge numbers of troops in balletic formations. It was to be an obsessively researched, military-focused costume drama played out in the very halls in which the events took place, with even the daily weather and cuisine accounted for. It was to be Kubrick unleashed. So then why doesn't this movie exist? And why is it called the greatest movie never made? This is the story of Stanley Kubrick's biggest failure. Failure not to finish, but to even properly start, despite years of investment in research and development. This is the story of Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon. So sometime during his 3-year process of planning, executing, and releasing his now iconic Space Odyssey, the enigmatic Stanley Kubrick brought a long-standing idea of his to the foreground in deciding to make his next film about the controversial emperor. When asked in 1969 why he had chosen Napoleon for his next topic, Kubrick replied, "To begin with, he fascinates me. His life has been described as an epic poem of action. Also, I find that all the issues with which it concerns itself are oddly contemporary, so this will not just be a dusty historic pageant, but a film about the basic questions of our own times, as well as Napoleon's." Wanting to present the past as a vivid present, Kubrick focused on portraying the time as it was to the people living through it. He said, "It is difficult to make a film about a historical figure that presents the necessary historical information and at the same time conveys a sense of the day-to-day reality of the characters' lives. Most people don't realize, for example, that Napoleon spent most of his time on the eve of a battle immersed in paperwork." There are times when Kubrick's involvement with Napoleon had intense elements of self-identification. For instance, Stanley, the former New York City chess hustler, didn't only investigate whether or not Napoleon played chess, but scrutinized and critiqued his military strategy through the lens of an expert chess player. In his estimation, Napoleon wasn't a chess master, but he was an excellent gambler. And it was as a mad genius risk-taker that Kubrick wanted to present him, sometimes with empathy and sometimes with irony. As was his way, Kubrick wanted to know the totality of his subject from every angle and point of view. So the first step was to immerse himself in the period and topic. Gathering every book in the English language on the matter, Kubrick amassed the largest private collection on Napoleon and his entourage in the world, the best of which numbered around the 500 mark, which was then cataloged and indexed after being read and absorbed by Kubrick. After 10 years of theorizing and applying universal principles, the French Revolution came to grief because in the end it could not count on the natural goodness of man. Napoleon appealed to the selfish interests of men and cleverly tried to combine good programs with sufficient incentives to get the most out of men. Like with everything else, Kubrick was extremely concerned with the issue of costumes and prioritized a substantial amount of money spent on hiring costume designer David Walker, who began researching and sketching the wardrobes for each of the main roles early in development. In May of 1968, Kubrick also sent his location scout and assistant Andrew Birkin for the summer to take 35mm Kodachrome photos of all the sites associated with Napoleon's life. After negotiations with the French Minister of Culture, Birkin was given authorization to photograph historical sites pertaining to the story, including residences, offices, cathedrals, gardens, government chambers, chateaus, and palaces such as the one at Versailles. Unfortunately, very few actual Napoleonic battlefields existed where they could still shoot. The land itself had either been taken over by industrial or urban development, or they were surrounded by anachronisms. Like, a Fiat plant in the background of a cavalry charge doesn't work, even if that's where it actually happened, and he couldn't just paint it out in the computer like we can now. To aid in his research, Kubrick sought out and hired Professor Felix Markham of Oxford University as the lead consultant, and then subsequently bought the rights to his 1963 book Napoleon to be used as the basis of his screenplay. Using Professor Markham's university contacts, by June of 1968, Kubrick had 20 Oxford grad students breaking down and summarizing his rapidly growing collection of topical literature. From primary sources such as contemporary 19th century English and French accounts to modern biographies utilizing 2 centuries of hindsight. These indentured students took the 50 principal historical figures of the film and broke their lives down to the smallest degree of detail. All of this information, from where they stayed to what they ate, was cross-indexed into an enormous card catalog system, a remarkable achievement on its own. Along with historical details pertaining to the characters, Kubrick and his team assembled a monumental amount of research material, including 17,000 images dated from the year of Napoleon's birth to roughly 10 years after his death in 1821. These paintings, drawings, etchings, and engravings were then photographed and carefully mounted on IBM aperture cards, which were later sorted by archaic machines with the help of strategically placed colored tabs indicating the nature of the image. This shit was state of the art, and only someone like Stanley Kubrick would insist on it all. Then in 1968, MGM and Stanley Kubrick announced plans to make Napoleon the director's next project. Kubrick broke his script down into 15 sequences with an average of 12 minutes per sequence. He expected his movie to be 180 minutes long and take 150 days to shoot. He also identified the 4 principal categories of cost which represent the largest proportion of any spectacle film. 1. Large number of extras. 2. Large number of military uniforms. 3. Large number of expensive sets. 4. Overpriced movie stars. With Napoleon, he intended to flip the script and handle these 4 categories in a financially advantageous manner, which would result in substantial savings to the budget, allowing the film to be produced for a much lower cost than usual without any loss of quality or substance. For the large numbers of men needed to shoot the enormous battle scenes, Kubrick's plan was to make arrangements with a government or two in Eastern Europe to use their standing regular army as extras, like he did a corps of German policemen for his 1957 film Paths of Glory. The daily cost of a costumed extra in England or Western Europe was $15 to $25 a day, so it's no surprise what Kubrick was thinking when he wrote, "You can just imagine the cost of 50,000 extras over an extended period of time." Contacts were established with the army first in Yugoslavia, then in Romania. Kubrick personally met with representatives from these then socialist countries who were very interested in having a high-profile movie filmed largely in their front yards, especially since the producers would be paying the local fixers in American dollars, worth far more than the domestic currency they in turn would be paying for locations, people, equipment, and everything else needed by a large production crew out on location. Kubrick wrote, "They have almost the same freedom to trade in this respect as they would if they were swapping Monopoly money for dollars." What he needed for these enormous battle sequences was a maximum 30,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, so the shooting locations would have to be within marching distance of the barracks in which they're stationed. These battles took place out in the open with vast formations of men moving in choreography, so the terrain was an incredibly important factor in how battles played out. He was going to use a combination of production footage, narration, and animated maps to explain the battles. You know, there's this weird disparity between the sheer visual and organizational beauty of historical battles sufficiently far in the past and their human consequences. It's rather like watching two golden eagles soaring through the sky from a distance. They may be tearing a dove to pieces, but if you're far enough away, the scene is still beautiful. After the cost of paying housing and feeding all the extras, costuming them in period-accurate uniforms was the next major issue Kubrick identified. The price of frontline uniforms made in Europe were $200 a piece, while in the Soviet bloc countries, even low-quality reproductions were $40 to $50 a piece, which would be astronomical for large battles. Kubrick believed he'd made a big breakthrough on this point by discovering a company in New York City who made printed clothing, in this case military uniforms, on a special DuPont paper, which was drip dry, fireproof, and had a 300-pound breaking strength, even when wet. These would start at only $1 a piece, with the price going up to $4 depending on the level of detail. Through camera testing, he determined that the $4 uniform would suffice for anyone who would be wearing them at least 40 yards away. Kubrick also noted an interesting visual phenomenon that at a certain distance, the human eye cannot distinguish clothing detail. So if it were possible to get an enormous number of people and to shoot them from the distance needed to actually fit them in the frame, the stand-in troops wouldn't even need a uniform and could simply wear the clothes they showed up in. The next major issue for the penny-pinching Kubrick was the inherent cost of recreating the different period locations in a studio environment. Because building and decorating a large number of palatial sets for emperors and kings would be ruinously expensive. So he was determined to use authentic locations on the continent, where many buildings and sites from the time were still preserved enough to use, especially in Italy and France. These locations could be rented by the day for $350 to $750, and in most cases came completely furnished and decorated from the period. Unfortunately, one of the downsides to using period locations is that color film at that time required a lot of light to make it look good, which necessitated hauling around and powering these big, cumbersome lighting equipment, all of which took time, effort, and money. To sidestep this, Kubrick planned to shoot all interior locations with minimal to no equipment, using special triple-wick candles that burn brighter and longer and reflectors to focus the natural light they provided. He decided this after discovering an extremely rare f/095 50mm lens made by Perkin-Elmer Company, who specialized in making lenses for the aerospace industry. This lens was 2 full stops faster than the fastest lens available for 65mm film cameras, the large format he intended to use at the time. This lens will cost approximately $5,000, but will save many, many times its cost, and, of course, is a resaleable and reusable item. This is different from the now famous Zeiss f/07 50mm lens he later used to shoot a large chunk of his next film, Barry Lyndon, with light predominantly coming by natural and/or candlelight. But the desire was coming from the exact same place. Kubrick also intended to enhance the speed of the footage after the fact using special development techniques which would brighten the interior candlelight footage further. And he planned on having a laboratory installed at the studio, which would provide quality control in a way not possible going through the conventional English facilities at the time. To supplement the location footage, Kubrick also planned to make extensive use of the front projection shooting technique, which he made excellent use of for the Dawn of Man opening sequence in 2001: A Space Odyssey. This allows a picture 150 feet wide by the full height of the stage to be projected from an 8x10 color transparency from the shooting camera's position onto a special 3M fabric coated in tiny beads of glass. Because of the properties of the screen and shooting through a partially front-surfaced mirror, which allows the projected light and the camera lens to be perfectly aligned, the picture does not show up on the foreground set or the actors and gives you a picture on the screen equal in sharpness to what might be obtained on the location. During its use in filming 2001, Kubrick said, "We are getting magnificent shots, but everything is like a 106-move chess game with 2 adjournments." The great advantage at the time, pre-computer effects, was that if you're trying to shoot a long scene using the same great and more importantly consistent exterior lighting, then that's really difficult to do because the sun doesn't stop moving and is often obscured by clouds, making true consistency all but impossible. Using the front projection method, you could pick your best lighting background, photograph it, and then hold that light in the studio for as long as needed, be it hours, days, or weeks, on a scale of practicality not possible using the more common rear projection or early blue screen matte replacement. Kubrick liked this technique as it allowed an instant change of location by simply changing the 8x10 color transparency slide. On any scenes ranging from 200 to 300 extras down, this will be of enormous value. The last item Kubrick paid particular attention to was the cast, specifically movie stars. In November of 1968, he wrote, "I think sufficient proof must now exist that overpriced movie stars do little besides leaving an insufficient amount of money to make the film properly or cause an unnecessarily high picture cost." Kubrick intended to use great actors and new faces, but more sensibly put emphasis on the story, the spectacle, and his own ability to entertain. I don't claim he is the best and most honorable man in history, only the most interesting. Around this time, Kubrick is known to have offered the lead to Oscar Werner, but Stanley's brother-in-law and executive producer, Jan Harlan, affirms both David Hemmings and Ian Holm were favored by Kubrick, who also entertained the idea of casting Jack Nicholson during his second attempt to get the movie made. So finally, after years of research and development and planning and pivots and negotiations, in September of 1969, Stanley Kubrick delivered his working script and production notes to the brass at MGM, with principal photography planned to begin in the winter of 1970, spending 2 to 3 months on the exteriors and battle sequences, then 3 to 4 months on the interiors. Unfortunately, by that time, MGM were no longer interested in the wake of several recent large-scale failures at the box office. There had also been a changing of the guard, and the new executive had no interest in a project that started under someone else's leadership. According to Jan Harlan, Stanley was rather depressed and disheartened by it all, saddened that his Napoleon would be consigned to the archive of might-have-beens. After breaking up with MGM, he started talks with United Artists, but Hollywood was cash-strapped at the end of the 60s, and it was just too expensive and out of fashion with the tastes, which were steering towards Easy Rider and away from Spartacus. Then, in October of 1970, an English-language epic co-produced by Italy and the Soviet Union released Waterloo. The huge, lavish production failed to recoup its cost, and the results were so disastrous that Kubrick decided to shelve the project indefinitely, turning his attention to adapting Anthony Burgess's dystopian novella, A Clockwork Orange, which would eventually become a highly influential cult movie following the controversy of its release. Jan Harlan explains that Stanley Kubrick remained deeply fascinated by Napoleon for the rest of his life, a victorious figure who made catastrophic errors in judgment, often ignoring better advice or his own knowledge. Was it driven by vanity, envy, or ambition? Napoleon's reckless nature led him to gamble everything, ultimately leaving him with no one to blame but himself for the devastation he caused. In Kubrick's envisioned film, the audience would have been torn between admiration and revulsion for this charismatic and charming leader who was also an impetuous, egocentric despot. Kubrick's vision aimed to capture the vast sweep of history and the overwhelming force of one man's ambition, while simultaneously offering an intimate portrayal of vanity at its most destructive. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I've got a couple years worth of video essays like this lined up after this one. Not joking. You should go back and watch my previous essays, especially the one on Color Me Kubrick with John Malkovich. Have a good one, and I'll see you again soon.